Greetings to our listeners. Please click subscribe button. Today we will talk about Issei Sagawa, a Japanese serial killer, cannibal, and necrophiliac known as Kobe Cannibal. Sagawa was detained on June 13. It was nice spring day in Paris. People were enjoying the beautiful weather strolling around a park. However, a couple walking in the park noticed a short Japanese man walking around with a suitcase. The man's behavior was quite strange. He was holding a heavy suitcase. It was obvious that he had great difficulty carrying it. While the couple continued to watch this strange man, they noticed a strange detail in the suitcase. There were blood leaks in the places where the suitcase was dragged. The Japanese man became anxious when he saw that people around him were staring at him, and when he realized that he could not carry the suitcase any longer, he rolled the suitcase into the bushes towards the lake. People began to open the suitcase. There were dismembered body parts inside the suitcase. A Japanese man quickly moved away from the scene after the crowd noticed the suitcase, but the police managed to catch the man in a short time. The owner of the suitcase was Japanese cannibal Issei Sagawa. He was born on April 26 in 1949 to wealthy parents. Sagawa was born prematurely. He was so small that he could fit in his father's hand at the time of his birth. He was interested in cannibalism at a very young age. He loved the monster game where he tried to eat his brother. Sagawa, who saw the buttocks of a male classmate in the same years, explained that his desire for cannibalism was revealed for the first time in these years. In an interview with an online channel in 2011, Sagawa openly stated that he committed bestiality on his dog at a young age and that he had a cannibalistic desire for women. Sagawa himself explained the reason for his cannibalism. He argued that he could never be understood by someone who did not share the same desires as him. When he was 15, he went to see a therapist because of these impulses. However, the result he got from the therapy did not satisfy him, and he thought that the therapy was useless and stopped receiving treatment. Although he quit therapy, he tried to stay away from his urges for a long time and was successful. In 1972, his violent urges began to take over him. In general, Sagawa liked European women much more than Asian women, which is why in 1972 he noticed a young German woman living in Tokyo. He sneaked into her apartment with the intention of eating her body. However, the woman woke up before Sagawa could attack her. She was able to thwart Sagawa's attack and catch him because Sagawa was a skinny man who was 5 feet tall. The police arrested Sagawa for attempted rape. However, the court did not convict him for attempted rape because Sagawa's father, who was quite rich, paid a settlement to the victim. After this incident, Sagawa continued to suppress his urges for a long period of 9 years, but in 1981 his desires would begin to surface again. Sagawa had started studying at the University of Sorbonne and would bring different prostitutes to his home every night, allegedly trying to kill them with a gun every time. However, he could not pull the trigger for some reason. Once Sagawa invited his Sorbonne classmate Renee Harteville to his apartment. Renee was 25 years old from the Netherlands. She was single. She spoke 3 languages, and her future in French literature was very bright. Sagawa believed that Renee was the perfect candidate for his vicious plans. He had failed many times before. He had to be more careful this time. He became friends with Renee and asked her to give him German classes. As Sagawa's family was rich, he offered Renee good fee in exchange for German classes. The two would spend more time together, have conversations, and attend concerts and exhibitions together. One day, he invited Renee to his house again. After having dinner, they started reading poetry together. Towards the evening, Renee set out to go home, but Sagawa was making his perverted thoughts clear in his mind. After Renee left, he began smelling and licking the place where the girl had been sitting. Then he made a promise to himself that he would eat Renee's flesh. He invited Renee to dinner again. He said that he had bought a cassette tape and that they could record their voices reading poems. Renee accepted the offer happily. The dinner was to be held on June 11, 1981. This was going to be her last dinner. Sagawa had bought a .22 caliber rifle from a gun shop supposedly to protect himself. He was slowly starting to implement his plan. When Renee came home, he sat her on the floor to drink tea together in accordance with Japanese culture. Then, to make Renee relax a little more, he added some whiskey to her tea. After a while, he gathered his courage and started to tell Renee that he was in love with her and wanted to sleep with her. Renee told him his feelings were not reciprocated and that she only see him as a friend. She wanted them to remain friends. Sagawa pretended to accept this situation and nodded his head. Then he stood up to pick up his poetry book. Renee sat down on a chair and started recording the poem she was reading. While Renee was reciting the poem, Sagawa came out of the room with his rifle and shot her in the back of the neck, ending Renee's life. A woman had fallen off the chair. She was dead. Sagawa didn't know what to do. First, he tried to clean the blood, but there was so much blood that he did not want to deal with it any further. After her death, Sagawa took off Renee's clothes. He believed that Renee belonged to him now, and with this thought he raped her corpse and performed necrophilia on her. Grabbing a knife, Sagawa started chopping the corpse. First, he ate the woman's nose and the tip of her left breast. Sagawa would later share these gruesome details in his book. While eating the corpse, Sagawa was listening to the poem recited and recorded by Renee. After a while, he started to realize that he had to get rid of the corpse. He took the pieces of the corpse to his bed on the first day and slept with them. Sagawa would later admit that he enjoyed this process very much. He put the dismembered parts of Renee's corpse in the suitcase. He then called a taxi and arrived at a park with the suitcase. He was going to drag the suitcase to the park and throw it into the pond. But Sagawa attracted people's attention in the park with the suitcase he was carrying. Drops of blood began to leak from the suitcase. Realizing that people were watching him, Sagawa was disturbed and panicked. He dragged the suitcases into the bushes. When the suitcase opened, people in the park were horrified. A human hand was hanging from the suitcase. Horrified people quickly called the police. Sagawa had fled from the scene and sought to eat the other body parts he was hiding in his house. 2 days after the murder, the police identified Sagawa and went to his house. The police found pieces of a human corpse in the house, including lips. Sagawa began to explain what he had done in full details, and also mentioned that he had a mental illness. During the trial, Sagawa described everything he did to Renee in details. This led the judge to decide that he was mentally ill and was not fit to stand trial. Sagawa clearly seemed to be dreaming, and what he said seemed quite normal for him. The judge sentenced Sagawa to stay in the mental hospital for an indefinite period of time. 3 psychiatrists examining him said Sagawa would never recover. After staying in mental institution for 15 months, Sagawa was extradited to Japan with the help of his wealthy father who had connections. Sagawa's father argued that his son's imprisonment and psychiatric treatment should continue in Japan, but the superintendent at the treatment center was causing difficulties and wanted Sagawa to serve his sentence. However, the superintendent was not successful, and thanks to his father's power and connections, Sagawa spent only 5 years in Japan after serving his sentence. He was later released. In addition to being able to move freely in the society, Sagawa even managed to obtain a German passport. However, what made the situation worse was that after Sagawa was released, He happily told all television and newspapers about the crime he committed. Sagawa was gaining popularity for his heinous crime. His book, in which he described the details of the murder, sold more than 200,000 copies. Sagawa did not show any remorse and would proudly describe himself as the godfather of cannibalism, saying that he was happy about it. He also sketched his story in the form of comics and wrote weekly columns, giving interviews. In one of his interviews to a local magazine, Sagawa said, "I am thinking of being eaten by a Western woman. Only such an act can save me." As a matter of fact, Sagawa remained unpunished for his crime and lived freely until the age of 73. He was paralyzed due to damage to his nervous system in 2022. His brother continued to care for him. Sagawa died on November 24, 2022.